Welcome everyone to the fifth and last session of the series, Stealing the Earth, the Conquering of Indigenous Peoples, the Role of Christianity, and What Can Bring About Justice. My name is Bridget Cabrera, she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director for Methodist Federation for Social Action. MFSA has been around for over 100 years. We're a faith-based policy and organizing network, and our mission is to mobilize, lead, and sustain a progressive United Methodist movement, energizing people to be agents of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. And we're honored to be co-hosting this webinar series with our partners, the Native American International Caucus and United Methodists for Kairos Response. I'm joining the call from Detroit, Michigan. And I'd like for us to begin by acknowledging and uplifting the history and present of Detroit as Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires, Ojibwe, Adobe, and Potawatomi. Detroit is also the largest majority Black city in the nation, with a long legacy of African diasporic global contributions, and was once the last stop on the Underground Railroad. Detroit's also the US city with the largest concentration of Arab Americans, a border city with historic and growing Latinx communities, and a legacy of Asian American communities and movements. We acknowledge this land, its history, and all the beings seen and unseen, known and unknown, as we step into our work on this land and the many lands that you all are joining us from, most of us as uninvited guests. And we offer this work in the spirit of reparation, devoting ourselves to justice as we strive to uplift the legacy of this land. And we ask if you would like to acknowledge the Indigenous community or communities of the land of where you are currently, to please name them in the comments. A few announcements concerning our call today. Our webinars are a place to learn, be challenged, and be in community together. We seek to create an equitable and brave space, one where we treat each other with respect and dignity. And we are recording this webinar, and that recording will be shared in the coming days. And as you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We also have closed captioning available. It is automatically generated, so expect to possibly see some spelling errors as well. It's automatically generated. The Doctrine of Discovery is based on a series of 15th century papal bulls. It's a body of international law developed by European powers in the beginning of the colonial project. This body of law stated that any undiscovered, unchristian land could be claimed by the European power that discovered it. And it was the legal justification for stealing land from First Peoples all over the world. It's the basis for white supremacy, imperialism, and colonialism. And today, our fifth and final session of our series, we will be in conversation around undoing the doctrine, developing a theology of repentance and repair. I invite us to take a moment to pause and center the families and communities impacted by the shooting in Texas yesterday. I invite you to offer words of prayer in the chat. And today is also the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. This is the 27th school shooting this year in the United States, which means one has occurred roughly every 5 days in 2022. There are more incidents of violence, in particular gun violence, from Buffalo, which was rooted in white supremacy, to more than we can mention on this call. And according to the New England Journal of Medicine, guns surpassed car accidents as the #1 cause of death among children in the United States in 2020, increasing almost 30% between 2019 and 2020. And according to CNN, there have been more mass shootings this year than there have been days this year in the United States. And we as humanity who share this home that we call Earth together with all of creation are responsible for each other and to each other. And it should not be easier to buy a gun than it is to get access to health care or baby formula in the United States. And we as a society here in the US and all around the world must act to pass gun reform laws at all levels of government. And our conversation here today that we're having around dismantling the doctrine of discovery are so essential, highlighting even more clearly the prioritization of our societies of profit over people. And for our conversation today, we are so honored to welcome our two speakers, great-grandmother Mary Lyons and Reverend Chebon Kernell Jr. with us today. Great-grandmother Mary Lyons is an Ojibwe elder, a world-renowned wisdom keeper, knowledge holder, humanitarian, and empowerment coach, activist, and author. She brings a decolonial and anti-capitalistic framework to the mainstream environmental movement through spiritual wisdom lessons. She speaks at rallies, city council meetings, schools, women's prisons, global elders circles, and is currently an elder observer at the United Nations Forum on Indigenous Issues. Being an activist and policy changer, she worked on everything from Native Lives Matter, missing and murdered Indigenous women, LGBT, transgender issues, Moms Clean Air Force organization, and bringing awareness and action to protecting the four elements: water, air, fire, and earth. Reverend Chebon Kernell Jr., an ordained elder in the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, enrolled member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and is of Muskogee Creek heritage, is the executive director of the Native American Comprehensive Plan of the United Methodist Church. He has worked with the World Council of Churches, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and the United Methodist Church Council of Bishops, assisting to improve relationships with Indigenous communities through dialogue, study, and local or regional acts of repentance, acknowledging harms inflicted upon Indigenous communities. Welcome to you both. Chebon will begin our conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you, Bridget. It is my pleasure to be here. But before we get started, the way that we do things is I'm going to offer some things in our language to kind of do the proper introduction of myself to those of us that are on this call, but also to my ancestors, letting them know, what right I have to come here and to speak and to share on behalf of our Indigenous peoples. And I'll explain a little bit more as we go through our conversation as to why. And if everyone will bear with me, that it is appropriate also to start in a mode of spirituality. And I'm going to share just a brief song. I did this on a webinar earlier, and even we have some relatives that have joined me earlier, and now they're on this call. That if they'll just bear with me, I'm going to share it for us as we think about those acts of violence, the innocence of our children, and our hopes for a world that is full of peace. But before I get started, I need to let everyone know who I am. Chebon Kernell Chahochip Kadowin Hadot Gogi Amalegadero Ombozit Nogosogedos. Halubi Kanidi Adolwa Chogosako Dazagayad Ois. Mikosapka Chogo Ao Mathidas Iskinagedos. What I shared with you in our tongue is something that I've done all over the place. I share is that I'm a part of our Muskogee people. I serve one of our ceremonial communities in a certain capacity. And usually to talk about that, I would have someone speaking on my behalf. It would be inappropriate for me to say that myself. But because we're on a webinar and a Zoom, I try to do what I can. But that's where I take my family and we worship that way, in addition to in the context of the Methodist Church and Christianity. But the more important thing that I shared in that those brief lines there was my clan lineage. and who my children are clans of, that I'm a member of the Wind people, and that my companion in life, who we are a matriarchal society, and she represents the Bear Clan. So my children are all Bear Clan. We say this because we let our ancestors and all those know that this is who we are and where we stand with our people in creation. So I just wanted to share that little bit as it is appropriate as we begin our journey to truly understanding what it will take to um, continue to deconstruct any type of doctrine that has been violent, as this doctrine has been in history. But I also want to honor, like I said, in a mode of prayer, um, our what we're going through as a people, as a society, and a community. I'm honored to be here with my auntie, Mary Lyons, who continually reminds me of the broader spectrum of creation, of all of us, that we're all in this walk of life together. And those are as a young man, that's what I constantly need as I see so much trials that have faced our Indigenous peoples worldwide. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to sing just a brief line of this song that we sing here in Oklahoma. It's a Yama Istimithkidon. So just bear with me for just a brief moment. Yama Istimithkidon, Eoyana yo. Yana yo, Yana Yama isti miskidan, Yana yo, Jesus our God is, oh boy, dark is. Yea, John, he talks, oh boy, doggy, yea, John, he talks, oh boy, doggy, yea, John, he talks, Jesus, our God, thieves. And the song talks about this walk of life that we go through that is marred with trials and all the obstacles that we see, and that at the end of the day that we go through this walk of life that will be reunited with our creator, with God. And the song actually uses the term Jesus, which in our theologies of native churches would have paralleled that of God. So in essence, we're there with God after we go through these things. And the last line talks about our children have gone through that. And it's like the singer, it says, I see them there, that they're there with our creator. And that was very emotional for me today, and even this morning when I shared that song, because our children who suffered harm just last night, um, they're at peace. They're not a part of this world. So share that little bit with you today as we think about, what does it take to engage in dismantling something that is so pervasive that we don't even realize that it's there. And so as the presenters shared with me a little bit about your previous webinars that we had gone through, about some of the previous work, and even I myself have been through various initiatives across our denomination and internationally, as we have looked at this concept of the doctrine of discovery. The way that I look at it is that my recommendation was, I said, well, let's just go to the heart of our identity as Indigenous peoples, and let's let our community see what it is to interact as Indigenous peoples. So the format of this particular conversation is probably a little bit different as we come together. And so I'm thankful that I have my relative here, Mary, to come and to walk with us. But we wanted to just kind of embody and just demonstrate a little bit of, how we go about things as Indigenous peoples. Because once we start to learn how to talk together again, how to exist together, and even not just as human beings, but how we walk upon this earth mother in reverence, that we'll start to begin to understand what it truly means to dismantle this doctrine that is the foundation for everything that we see that has entered this arena of exploitation. And it can go back to these origins. And even today, I'm reminded that the essence of this doctrine even undermined our understanding of this Mother Earth, and even began that process of dispossession, of taking us from our territories and our homelands, and even the intimacy that we have as an, excuse me, as Indigenous peoples, when we walk upon her and realize that all that she has done for us. But today, the reality is we forget that we're part of something that's been there, eating away at taking away from our understanding of this earth. So I wanted to start out, and I did. It's very inappropriate, in my opinion, to speak first before my elder, before an Indigenous woman and an Indigenous leader. But we kind of talked it over a little bit, and I had to ask permission if it was okay to start today, because I wanted to, that's the reverence that we share in our communities. That's the reverence that we walk upon when we encounter each other. And so I asked my Auntie Mary, I said, is it okay if I share something to help get us started as we think about where we come, with this doctrine? How do we start building our lives back together? That's what, when we think about repentance and this theology, how do we come to a different area of existence? Even deviating from even classical Christianity, deviating from what we've been taught is reality. And so I asked my auntie if that was okay. So I'm going to share a story now. It's not, now I'm going to try to turn on a happy mode here and be joyous and joyful. I know life is what it is, and we try to do what we can. But for those of you that know me, you know that for a period of time, I worked for our missionary entity, Global Ministries, with the denomination, the United Methodist Church. And I will be the first to say that never in my wildest dreams, as an Indigenous person, as a person knowledgeable of our things and the things that we do, I never thought I would ever work for a missionary arm of any denomination. In fact, I sat there and I'm like, oh, how did I get here? 15, 12 years later. And, they were housed in the Upper West Side at one time of Manhattan in New York. And, I can remember thinking, the first times I went there, I was kind of nauseous because I didn't see any grass and I didn't see any sun. In fact, the first time I went into the office there, no one even hardly talked to me. I went in and it was dark. I think it was November, and I came out of the office and it was dark, and I didn't even see the sun that day. And it made me kind of sick to my stomach. And I said, man, I want to go home. I said, I don't want to be here. But time went on, and I started picking up those characteristics of this kind of, to us, it's like a big city, we're sitting here. And, there was other gatherings, other things that I would be a part of. And in fact, this is kind of where Mary and I first interacted in some of our meetings that we were called to with some of our respective colleagues at the United Nations, and specifically around the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues. And so I remember I had no idea what that was. I was sitting there like, oh, I'm going to the UN, huh? And I didn't know. I got the address, and we went there, and I started learning a little bit more about what it was. But after a couple of years, I tried to take a few people with me to just give them that opportunity to see, to experience this place of worldwide Indigenous peoples who were coming with an agenda, talking about, the challenges to their self-determination that they had, the challenges that they saw every day, the right to exist, the right to maintain their homelands. I started hearing that, and it became to be, very exciting to me. So I tried to bring as many people as I could as time went on. But then one year, I said, you know what? Funding was becoming challenging, and I said, I'm just going to go by myself. I said, I don't know if I have enough time to bring a whole group, to get meals, to do all the planning, all of these things. I said, I'm just going to go by myself and try to take notes and make sure I bring it back to our denomination, some of the priorities that we see coming out of these international discussions. And I sat there, and lo and behold, this young man, this country boy from Oklahoma, started acting like he was from the big city. I sat there and I put the headphones in. I wasn't looking up. I didn't talk to nobody. I was walking real fast, and still not as fast as everyday New Yorkers. But I found myself in a moment there where I fully assimilated into this city life, so to speak. And I remember that day, that year. Now, I don't know what year it was, but we were going into the beginning of the meetings. You have to have a badge with your name on it, or you can't get onto the grounds at all. And so we always have to register, or we had to register, and we had to get that. And so I went up there, I had my stuff, and like, oh, I'm used, I'm from around here. I know my way around. I'm gonna just sit here and do my thing and go back to the Upper West Side and mind my own business after I'm done. And I sat there, and on this particular day, it was raining, so I might have been a little cranky. I don't know if you remember that, Mary. It was raining, and so we were a little drenched. So I was kind of, I had my, my little quasi suit on, my vest and stuff, and I was just sitting there watching. Okay, got to wait in line, and anybody gets kind of cranky when you have to wait in a queue or wait in a line, and have to go through that thing. And so I'm sitting there like, I'm not going to talk to nobody, mind my business. And next thing you know, someone comes up right next to me and elbows me, kind of nudges me. It's such a beautiful day today outside, and the Creator has blessed us. And I'm like, it just rained on us. I'm all wet. I'm dripping here. And I didn't think anything. I was like, I just shook my head, and I didn't look, to my right. I didn't look. I said, okay. And it didn't stop. Another, I'm just, look at all of these indigenous peoples in their regalia. It's so beautiful because, indigenous peoples worldwide, we wear, those things that kind of notate who we are and where we're from. So the international community had that on and kind of nudged me, look at all of these indigenous peoples. And I said, I don't even know what else I was thinking. And if I did, I don't know if I would disclose it to you, Auntie, about what I was thinking. But nudge me again. I'm like, Wouldn't look over. I didn't look at who was talking. And then finally, oh, it's such a blessing to be here. Where are you from, brother? And nudge me one more time. And I looked over to my right. And there was Mary, an Ojibwe elder. She had her otter skin hat on and everything. And at that moment I saw her, my entire being changed. And I remembered who I was as an indigenous person who comes from a matrilineal society, who carries a clan of his people, who was raised by his mother and his grandmothers, who understands the world. And I said, oh, my name was Chebon. And at that moment, I was convicted because I had forgotten. Something had changed me in all of those meetings, or whatever it was, who I was as an indigenous person. And so today, my hope is that in our time together, I don't know how many of you are on this call, that you can hear a little bit about how we talk to each other, how we exist as indigenous peoples, in hopes that it can serve as a roadmap to recognize this doctrine of discovery even exists, but also help us to remember how do we interact with each other. And so I'm thankful to be here because it's been my elders like Mary who have done that time and time again. And Mary has been gracious enough to be with us, be with me. She's come here to Oklahoma, she's come to other places. We're going to be traveling for the World Council of Churches to Karlsruhe in Germany later this year for the General Assembly, just trying to let people know that we have a way of existing. We have a way of life. And thanks be to our Creator, that way of life does not do violence to creation. And when we say that, it's not just the human species. It's like in my auntie's introduction, the elements of life, this water, this earth, this air, this fire, all of these things that in our indigenous cultures, those are always there, an emphasis on that and how we respect those grandparents and how they take care of us. And so that's what I suggested to our planners. I said, just let us talk so that people can see and embody a little bit about how we interact as Indigenous peoples. And so today, the first thing that I said, how do we deconstruct? How do we dismantle? How do we abandon this concept of exploitation that was in these foundational documents, writings today? For me, it's going back to the essence of who we are as Indigenous peoples, that remembering our peoples, all of us, had been in existence on this continent for thousands and thousands of years, and that this country of the United States, I believe this year will only be 246 maybe years old, that it's still in its infancy. So I started us out with that. And I'm just so thankful that we could be here. But now I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn it over to my auntie. And this is going to be just a talk that we have. And, you know, we have instructions from our planners to try to, you know, to talk about some of the things that has been discussed. But really, I want everyone to see our way of existing as Indigenous people. So I will stop there. Mary, I'll just invite you and share with you. And that was the first time I controlled my tears when I told that story. But thank you for walking with me on this journey.
Oh, me gwech. Bonjour, minogisa ni shnibi kwe Indigenous cause. I said in my language, you know, good morning, you know, hello. My name is Second Water Woman. I'm residing on the Lakota land in Minnesota. I am Anishinaabe Ojibwe. My ancestors came from the East Coast and they were pushed to the land where the water grows above the water. And Anishinaabe Ojibwe covered many territories across the northern states and into Canada. And my father is First Nations Ojibwe, and my mother, well, they're all Anishinaabe, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs declared her United States citizen Anishinaabe Ojibwe. So I come from the invisible line up in northern Minnesota in the boundary waters. It's an honor, first of all, to sit amongst you all and to hear such a long-awaited, difficult conversation. And miigwech nephew for that introductory. You know, I just will never forget. And it's been years. It just seems that we've done so much together, and so this journey we share is a blessed one for me. So one of the things that I want to say is, you know, we have so many, and first I have to acknowledge Chief Lauren Lyons that has been on this walk of the Doctrine of Discovery and dismantling it for decades, and has probably been one of the most outstanding Indigenous people that has been in this push to have truth be told. And I also have to acknowledge some young people that had gone to Rome and spoke to the Pope, Shel Shenandoah, young gal from up in upstate New York, from the Haudenosaunee tribes not there. They took the empty cradle boards up there to get the apologies from the Pope. So, you know, this is something that has been going on in small pockets within our communities for a long time. But I think it's really important that the audience needs to remember is that it wasn't until 1978 for the American Indian Religious Freedom Act to occur for us to speak our truths without the fear of endangerment of death or legal actions against us. So that foremost has to be, you know, the foundation of what we're going to be talking about. The second part of it that I think is extremely important is that we as Indigenous people need to have our voices in the front platform of it. We need to be speaking it for ourselves, because interpretation can be extremely dangerous if it comes from somebody else. because their interpretation and their energy is a real push to keep us silent again. So I would like to say to everybody is thank you, Chief Witch, for allowing Indigenous people to speak on these issues. Then the other thing too is mirror teachings and this stuff of what happened, when colonization happened in that beginning. You have to remember they deemed us as savages. And I believe if you watch the series, the first 4 series of it, you have some core knowledge of what we're going to be talking about today. Well, we're not savages, because you got to remember, if you take a look at, Turtle Island, United States and Canada and this stuff, it's a very large mass of Indigenous people, millions. And so if we were as brutal as the interpretation of those history books say they are, none of you outside the Indigenous world would be here. And if we became savages, we would have took you all out, because there was so many of us. But because we were such a kind, polite, given society in this, and to be caretakers of this earth and not landlords, we surrendered to our curiosities. And plus we were also, pushed because of fear and because of that theft and that misleading grip of that was coming into our lands. You see, we offer, as in the beginning and probably until we no longer exist, is our welcoming, is we always greet with such humbleness, and we feed. We not only feed the body, but we feed the spirit, and we live by our 7 sacred teachings. We know to stand in our courage and our honesty, and we base it on the respect of our ancestors teaching us, and we stand within our truth, and we bring forth that wisdom. And the only way we can do that, because we wrap our communities with love, and we stand within that humility of being Indigenous peoples. You see, we haven't gone anyplace. We're the seeds of the beginning of these caretakers on this land. You can't erase us, no matter how hard people try. There wasn't so much as the vast amount of massacres that took us out, which was a lot, but was illnesses that was bestowed on our lands and within our people, because these diseases were so foreign to us, such as this COVID happening to us, that took us under. But it was done with a lot of intent of putting sick people and the sickness into blankets. And you can go on, if you listen to Indigenous people tell their ancestral stories of what has happened to a majority of their people. So it's very important that you get history correct, because the lies that were told were the lies they carried over from those bodies of water, that naughty behavior was done there, and they brought it onto our shores, and thus this is what you see today. You see, if we keep mirroring those behaviors of what was happening from times past, not everybody that came onto our shores was bad. There was many people that were running from their lands for safety. What happened to us happened to them. So we have to walk back the root of behavior. And so once we do that, we have to paint that whole picture, because we have to stop pointing fingers. We have to start speaking our ancestral truths, because we're in this together. We share this one breath that when we come into this planet, we share this body of water. Many of you have heard the creation story that we tell is that, we came into this world with an agreement that we would come as a student, walk as a student, and leave as a student. And when our spirit entered our mother's womb, we swam in the purest of waters. For up to 9 months, our spirit swam and got downloaded, and they built this beautiful blanket around us. Then we met the opening of where we're here, and we took in that breath, that air, and we felt the warmth of the fire, and then we nourished and planted our feet on earth. You see, those are only 4 elements. These 4 elements, everything in this planet is made up of. We are the oneness of the greatness, the goodness of creation, and Creator has provided really good for us. But the interpretation, that learned behavior of hierarchy somehow became real naughty. And the thing is, what they wanted to do was be in control. And so they created a lot of this mess, and the interpretations were their own greed. But they thought they were going to wipe us out, but it didn't happen. Obviously, because you see the descendants sitting before you. And if you watch the other 4 documents on what we're talking about today, you'll understand this. But you have to understand the truth in the history and not the interpretation that comes from somebody that is non-Indigenous, because that will not be the truth, because for some odd reason, they fear, and it's somewhat of a shamefulness that they want to somewhat kind of make good. And we can't. If we're going to be talking about the truth, we have to go through these painful conversations. We have to talk about the truth of what happened to us. And it's very painful because not everyone in this planet is made up of goodness. For some reason or another, there's a shadow on their spirit that just brings such negativity into this world. So this is what I would like to say is when we dismantle something, what we're not dismantling is what people say. They put more value into those papers. You can't do this because this was written on our forefathers, but your forefathers wrote something to destroy our forefathers. So somehow we have to meet in the middle to say, this is not okay. This is so not okay. And that we have to start bringing more light back to this darkness. So this is what we're going to have this conversations about today. So, Jamie, quits for being here. Chebon?
Thank you, Mary, and all my relatives that are here to see us interact a little bit today must forgive me. I guess I thought that we were on for a couple of hours, so we only have about an hour today during our time. But I think it's vital, to see our talk like this, to see us interacting, and even to see how we talk when we're face to face, because the way that we communicate and show that reverence is exactly what concepts like the Doctrine of Discovery went against, undermining an entire self-determination of Indigenous peoples. And I know the other presenters over the past weeks have done a wonderful job of sharing a little bit, but when you see commentary that talk about the justification of the taking of lands, resources, and even people that were deemed non-Christian, and giving persons that theological right, that right from God is how they interpreted that our viewpoint is exactly opposite. That's founded in that respect for all of creation that led us to being places like you shared. I think it's vital that if we were violent creatures, if we were violent societies, we would have just nipped everything at the beginning and we wouldn't even have gone to this point. But we knew that there was a reverence, there was an energy there in creation that we may not understand, but we have to somehow be respectful of its existence. So today, in the year 2022, I think that's the dilemma that we all have, is how do we now compel the earth and its inhabitants, namely the human species, to have that same reverence, especially in the midst of what we're seeing here, of the statistics that our host had shared at the beginning. And my hope is that we can continue to provide this platform for our people to come and to share a little bit about how we interact with each other. And even today, that my children are already out of school for their summer vacation. And the first thing that I did with them is I embraced them. And, I said, Iji no geji dos, I love you. I let them know they're safe. That's how we interact with each other. And that, like you said, it's really perplexing why this is hostile to the rest of the world, this way of existing. We think of Standing Rock, we think of all of our movements to protect this Earth Mother. And I used to tell people, when we had our press conference in Atlanta that one time, I said the only weapons that we brought to that movement to open the eyes of the world at Standing Rock was prayers,
Yeah.
was spirituality, but yet we saw the violence that took place there. Even right now, I'm doing some work in Atlanta with the Wilani Forest. They're trying to preserve what's left of this country's largest urban forest from being destroyed for a militarized police facility to be built. And the same thing, we're going with spirituality, humbleness, respect as being one member of all of creation. And already violence is being inflicted by police forces. I just sit here and I question, like, what right, does one have? And unfortunately, it goes all the way back to this doctrine. The two that I'm most familiar with, one was early 15th century, one was right around the voyage of Christopher Columbus.
Mm.
It's embedded in that language of this is the right that you have. And so today, my hope is that we take these tools, that we at least know that there's a different way of existing, and it has preserved us. Our people, we're still here despite that. I'm sitting there, even Auntie, I was just looking over that boarding school report. It's taken me a week to get through it because I sit here and it triggers me. And to say it was intentional, to see those so-called founding fathers of this country to introduce alcohol. It was intentional to separate us from our families. It was intentional to demonize our language. It was intentional. And even you see it for the first time documented in this US sponsored writing, public writing, to dispossess the native peoples of their land. That's where the harmony comes, when we don't have that intimacy, that this Earth Mother has been faithful to us in her taking care of us with all of those elements. She hasn't been stingy with them and said, I won't give you air, I won't give you water. She's always provided that for us. And here we are wanting to put it in a bottle and sell it, to commodify it.
And I'm gonna jump right in there because
Jump in.
that's my journey in this stuff is good. When I said that the creation story, those four elements, this is all who we are, the makeup of this. This vessel our spirit's in, this container contains mostly water. And people go, we don't have to worry about the water. We got a lot of water. Oh, you can't drink that water in the ocean. That water was geared for the relatives in that water. And the water Mother Earth provided for us was just enough to satisfy us. And the thing is, what people do to individuals, because we are caretakers, we never strayed from that. We never strayed from that. When we go in and we pray for that water and pray with those relatives in the water, people don't realize that if you damage just one drop of that water, you're damaging one drop of society and everything in it, because we're all relatives in here. Those trees are like straws, and they drink that water up and it goes into their arms and it grows leaves and it gives us clean air. It's all associated within these four elements. And if you damage it, we're in a slow death, and people need to wake up, because you're right in those four elements. Those four elements were meant to be free. Water was never supposed to be sold, and now it's prostituted for a price. Air was never supposed to be sold, but yet it's prostituted for a price. Fire is the same way. People go, oh no, it's not. You have a gas bill. You buy a lot of medicines that you pump in you because you can't breathe. You have to buy water. You have pay for a water bill and this stuff. Took less than 120 years to just wipe out a lot of the organicness and put a price tag on it. No, you really have to think about it, because this is so important, because when we go to pray for the water and pray for the elements, this isn't just for us. This is for everything on this planet because we're relatives. This is so important. And that's where we say, part of the things when you look within those doctrines, that doctrine is a whip. And it's going to whip you in shape for who that master is that's holding that whip. And it's going to fool you. You see, they can put every ounce of digging and carving up our mother and brutalize her. And they will put them by what they think is people that are less of on our reservations and our reserves and our territories. But the fact still remains, if they contaminate that water, and if you don't stand with us in this water, your future grandchildren, you just poison the crap right out of them. And so as a great grandmother, I get so passionate about this because I don't care what color the child is, that child breathes the same air and has the same smile and nourishes the same love. And it doesn't matter what practice of religion they preaching out there, as long as it's in the harmony of righteousness and goodness, we're in this together. And right now, up at line 3, went to line 5, up into Canada, all this stuff, you know, all across the Americas in here. Sacred sites, when we say sacred sites, that's just like a newborn baby that you're trying to protect throughout time because it gives you that purity, that wellness that Creator gifted us. And so I am extremely passionate because we go up there and what they're called is water protectors, air protectors, no matter. And it's just not Indigenous people now. It's people from all over the world. We're in a very critical time, you know, because right now it's in a new age of today that yesterday is still happening. Because the taxes here in the United States and out there, I'm a taxpayer and they're brutalizing us on our dime. And that was at Standing Rock. That's up at line 3. I mean, if we could have showed the film of the Shell River 7, you'll see all denominations, all colors of grandparents. It breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart. So we have to pay attention. And we have to see that no matter that writing and that Doctrine of Discovery, those interpretations are in today's ruling and laws, not only right now to cheat Indigenous people, but to cheat all mankind, to manipulate you.
Yep.
So this is so, before I walk on and leave this world, I make sure my great-granddaughter sings my great-grandmother's songs, and it's never forgotten. And she has the duty, and not only that, the right to be those original caretakers. So she will stand in my position one day and within our belief systems in that there. So I'm sorry, Chebon, for cutting you in, but this is so passionate because the power of prayer and this stuff in that there, we're supposed to be, quote unquote, in the free world. We're getting locked up. There is so many young, beautiful people, scientists, doctors, everything you can think of, have felony warrants on them or tickets on them for praying, for the water, sacred sites, for the air. We have to wake up.
Thank you. Thank you, Auntie Mary, that you never have to apologize for asking me to pause, because this is what we're all here for, is to continue to hear the essence of how we exist beyond this doctrine, how we understand this earth. And even one of the greatest lessons that we have to teach people is that we're not only doing this just for Indigenous peoples. We don't advocate for clean water and air just for Muskogee people or Ojibwe people. It's for all of our people. And that's one thing we shared with those that worked for the police forces in Standing Rock. And even that's what I'm educating our folks in the Atlanta area, is that we're concerned about your children too.
Mhm.
I used to think that it would take a cataclysmic event to wake us up to a better existence. But over the past 2.5 years, I'm convinced that even a cataclysmic event won't change our course, will not change what I've heard scholars say, the trajectory of our human species in being violent.
I don't know
Um,
if the world is aware of our military bases in the southern states, our military people, where they go into training and this stuff, their waters were contaminated.
mhm,
California, they have water droughts. I mean, we have the worst Sonoma in Hopi land, in there with all those mines and this stuff.
mhm.
We really have to pay attention. Our free world is a free world to destruct our own lands and our own self in this stuff. So we can't say our enemies are coming after us anymore. It's we, the people in the United States here, that are doing our most harm to ourselves right now by ignoring this.
Yeah.
So this is a new day, and when you look at it, why things are important, that we have to abolish this doctrine of discovery, because that is put into a law that is theirs, but yet those laws still, they still hold on these lands. So the misinterpretation or the intentional interpretation of those laws are brought to today, and they're still doing the modernization of dismantling, because humans are the new product. They are the new product of what they're coming for. The enslavement just doesn't happen to a darker skin of color. The enslavement is happening to the world population, and we're witnessing it today. And the thing is, we all can do something about it. It is so important that we stand in this space in unity and within prayer and positiveness to say enough is enough. We are in a space where we can make change, but we have to open our eyes, and we have to stop being lazy and letting other people do due diligence for us.
Mhm.
So this is so important.
No, I'm just paying attention to our time and some of our comments in the questions, and there are so many I can't hardly keep up with them. But I do think it's important to notate. Someone had mentioned the felony records that you had mentioned, Mary, and I think that's what we have to recognize too, is that when we see the criminalizing of dissent, of just the ability to say no, is that now we're finding ourselves being subject to being arrested. You know, this is what we see going on in various states, in Oklahoma, in Georgia, for sure in North Dakota, all over the place, is that we can't even say no. And when we choose to take to the streets, when we've done all other measures of saying this is how we want to interact, we're arrested. And even at the United Nations, you hear concepts of ensure when you work with Indigenous peoples, when you go to these conversations, work for FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. But what I say is that's not enough, is that you have to even acknowledge non-consent and then go about leaving that Indigenous community alone. Because when when consent is not given, that the laws are now changed to take what is desired. So I know there's other things that I think there was a question on, centering Indigenous peoples and the environment, but it's more than that, because there's a cosmology that exists embedded in our language and in our interactions that will help to dismantle this. And we have to understand the privilege that comes with being in the United States, especially if we're not from a community of color, these types of things, so that in every aspect, we have to start working towards the equity of those voices that we see ourselves surrounding different areas of creation, and making sure those voices are informing us of not just how to, a casual statement, but informing us how to change our existence that will respect the things that the doctrine of discovery disrespects.
Yep.
So I think we're at the end of our time. I do want to go ahead and pull up some slides. These are just basic things. Now, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but these are suggestions on what we can do. And I'll give it a brief explanation as to why. What can you do? And forgive me, I typed these up a few moments before we started. So number one, host conversations in your home communities. Now, there's an assumption here that most of us are affiliated with the Methodist Church or in some form or fashion, but don't think it's just churches, but also think in terms of civic organizations and communities, because we can't find venues that are safe for us to speak freely about how we understand the earth, how we understand diversity, how we understand full inclusion in society. There's so many things that are embedded in dismantling this doctrine, is that somehow, we have to find that moment or that place where we can start that discussion, as with the reverence that we're trying to grasp via Zoom this afternoon. The same reverence that you saw, I hope, that was embedded in my acknowledgement of my Aunt Mary here. That's how we interact with each other. That's how we respect one another. And that's what we have all but almost lost as a society. Number two, for those that are part of the Methodist family, you have your annual conference structures there, and it was recommended by resolutions and action plans that we can take to those respective annual conferences. I've been writing resolutions since I was 18 years old. I'm 45 now, and I'm kind of resolutioned out, but I've used it in the offices of senators, in the offices of elected officials on Capitol Hill. And I said, this is what we think on whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, whether it's our Indigenous communities in Alaska villages, wherever it may be. I've taken that there and said, here's where we stand. Now, did it make a lot of difference? I don't know. But what I can say is that I did say it, and we did have it, and we did have people thinking about these types of things. Somehow partnering with our Native American organizations, church and non-church. That's what my hope is out of this discussion, is that I hope that we are not just bound by the concept of Methodism, and even bound by the concept of Christianity, that we have to realize that this is a worldwide community that we are a part of, and that we are always interacting with the broader interfaith conversations. But by all means, use our committees on Native American ministries, which most of our annual conferences have some leadership that are in place. There are fellowships and churches that are still in existence that have Native American people. Now, it's not the end all, but it's a pathway that we can go and interact with our Indigenous communities. And then, of course, we have this co-sponsor of our event today is the Native American International Caucus, that we have leadership there that are trying to do everything they can to respond to 1,000,001 different things that our Indigenous peoples are facing today. So making sure we support them, whether it be financially, whether it be just listening to the voices, and then of course NACP. I say all this, that's who I work for now as the Native American Comprehensive Plan, because we're all of us are on the cusp of not even being a part of the Methodist movement anymore because of funding and budget cuts, that kind of thing. It's kind of ironic that on one arena, we're sitting here talking about empowering and affirming Indigenous peoples, while at the same time, we're almost not a part of the structure anymore. So, but that's not the end all. We have tribal communities, we have grassroots organizations that we're surrounded by, that are doing language revitalization, that are understanding what it means to be in harmony with our earth, and even raising our own crops and food, and coming back to that intimacy that we once had prior to all of this movement. So I say, amplify our Indigenous-led movements around the country and globe. I've already mentioned the Wilani Forest, and I keep going back to Standing Rock, because that was probably the most powerful moment where we amplified the worldwide community. Let it be known this was not okay, what was taking place in North Dakota, in the community there of our relatives. Continue to do that when we see it on social media, when we see an urgent call being put out, that share those stories, share those voices that we hear people desperately. I think even right now, you have organizations like Indigenous Environmental Network, different ones out there that are trying to do their best to monitor what's going on all across the country and world about the so-called, or not so-called, but the dispossession of lands from Indigenous peoples that go back to this doctrine. Amplify those movements, and make sure that we understand that those are going on right now. and of course, engage in interfaith dialogue movements, because this isn't about Christianity. If we can only think in the context of Christianity, then we're still living within that doctrine. Is that we all have various understandings of spirituality or various religious articulations. We have to be a part of that. You know, if we think that this whole world is meant to be Christian and to be under Christian domination, then we still are perpetuating the doctrine of discovery. And then the last question is, how do you live? How do you embody that respect? Because that's truly how we will dismantle it. You know, when we take that next drink of water, what reverence will you have for that next drink of water? When you see a fire that, you know, purifies your food and provides warmth, how will you do that? Even when you take your next breath of air, to understand that there are 1 million different organisms that live, that have helped us to have that moment, that we're just one small piece of that existence. And so we'll go on to the last photo, and I'll end with that, because I just put it up there because it's these are my children. This is our homelands that come from the south central part of Georgia, the Ocmulgee Mounds. They say that this is the birthplace of Muskogee people. And we are just in a moment of acquainting ourselves with what it's like to be in our ancestral domains and territories. And this was taken a few years ago, because I think this photo embodies what I hope that we as a country will pursue at some point, is coming back to a way of existing with our young, with our people. So these are my two littlest ones a couple of years ago, as we were going through and I was sharing with them what these mounds mean to us, is that, you know, this is where our origins come from. This is where our clan stories originated from. And so with that, I think we're out of time, and I appreciate everything, Auntie Mary and everyone. I think I'm a little bit over, but I'll turn it back over to our host, Bridget. I'll give it to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to our speakers. And if you haven't had a chance to watch all the sessions, they are available online. I will put the link in the chat now so that you can access those. The recording of this call will be added to this site that I just shared in the chat. This page will kind of be could be your one-stop shop for this series that'll come in the future. I would also like to take a moment to recognize our planning team. We've been meeting regularly for, oh goodness, over a year now. And this series would not have been possible without the contributions of this very dedicated working group with Reverend Alvin Deere from the Native American International Caucus, Reverend John Wagner from UMKR, who is part of our original planning team, and now our new representative from UMKR, David Wildman, who's also the Executive Secretary for Human Rights and Racial Justice for the General Board of Global Ministries, Reverend Neil Christie, Executive Minister of Connected Engagement for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and Reverend Dr. Daniel Hawk, Professor of Hebrew Bible and Hebrew at Ashland Theological Seminary. This team will be debriefing and evaluating the webinars that we've done so far, and it is our hope that we will offer further conversation for us to gather together in a part 2 series. We're not sure how that will evolve, but our hope is that this is the beginning of our work together. As we heard on the call, there's so much work to do, and even not even on top of the work in society, the work we must do within ourselves. Even thinking about this webinar and kind of shifting the way we're even structuring this webinar in our practices and in our beings. We have put together a dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery resource list for further engagement and learning, and I'm going to put that in the chat as well. All of this is going to be with the recording online all together. So if you're watching at a later time, you can make sure you can find this. But this resource list has books, links to videos, links to this series, links to different statements. It's a very vibrant list for further learning as we continue to be in community and conversation. There will not be a webinar in June, but we will be back in July with the next UMKR MFSA webinar. You'll get more information about that in the coming days. And we really thank you all for joining us in these important conversations. And we look forward to seeing you and being in conversation together on our next call. Thank you, everyone.